for the president. I was not an advisor per se, being on full-time secondment from the private sector. Secondly, I have a poor grasp of protocol. So all I'm going to say is all protocol observed, and I will rest on my predecessor's protocol. Thank you, President. Much appreciated, Excellency. And finally, you're confronted with yet another man behind the microphone. I'm sure the organizers will try and remedy this for the rest of the program. Aside from our program director, we need a better reflection. That was sitting. So I'm going to reflect today briefly about the process we went through last year for South Africa's G20 and B20, the Business 20, the voice of the business sector across the G20 into the G20, and what it meant for the continent as a whole, as well as from a global perspective. Hosted by South Africa last year for the first time in its current format, it was the first time also in Africa, and it shone a spotlight on the continent for the right reasons, unlike so often happens. At a time of great global upheaval, of economic unpredictability, African leaders sought to build bridges between old and new partners, and sometimes between clashing visions. We were fortunate that the President of South Africa, as the President of the G20, addressed the B20 summit. He spoke about the importance of this being the first time the G20 was meeting on African soil. He said, and I quote President Ramaphosa, "From every corner of the earth, people are returning to the cradle of humanity to reflect on the state of our world and to chart a way forward to a more inclusive, prosperous and sustainable future. This is a moment," he said, "of great significance for Africa and a moment of great opportunity. An opportunity for Africa to assert its place in global affairs and to affirm its position as a leader of economic growth and social progress in the years and decades before us." And so just as it was not just the South African G20 presidency, but an African one, it was also the second year of the African Union's full participation as a member of the G20. We also sought as the B20 to put African issues at the center of the agenda. And all of the recommendations from across 8 task forces included Africa-specific recommendations, including the importance of inclusive growth and broadening participation, including the role of women, youth, and SMEs, infrastructure finance and investment reform, including climate finance, recognition of the importance of an energy mix, but also a just energy transition, climate resilience, and the finance required to enable this energy transition, the industrial mix and industrial transformation in regional value chains. We need manufacturing. We cannot simply export what we produce, and this includes critical minerals, which are vital for the world. The importance of the digital transformation and skills, closing the digital divide, which is very real in Africa, and food security and resilient supply chains. All of these are critical not just to the continent, but also to the global economy. In a time of rising political and geo-economic tensions, most notably reflected, you will recall, in the unpredictable tariffs and ever-changing. It's almost a year ago that we faced Liberation Day. Global business made it clear, though, that Africa was central to the future prospects for the world economy, and that building bridges was more important than erecting barriers. Our task force chairs and co-chairs, we had 8 chairs drawn from the continent, and over 80 co-chairs included senior executives from global companies and African ones such as Standard Bank, JP Morgan, MasterCard, Visa, Anglo-American, Microsoft, Amazon, Afrexim Bank, the African Development Bank, the Africa Finance Corporation, European firms such as Enel and Engie, and Chinese firms such as State Grid. Institutional partners like the International Finance Corporation, the World Economic Forum, OECD, and several UN agencies all participated as strategic partners, many of them for the first time in this process. So in a context of growing global divides, the message was clear. Isolation and fragmentation would not lead to prosperity, and traditional markets and trading partners could not on their own guarantee growth. Whereas the political process was unable to move forward and find solutions, the private sector-led process offered a way by placing Africa and African concerns at the center. The result was a series of consensus recommendations, somewhat remarkable given how deep the divides we face globally. And business sought to find common ground rather than dwelling on these divisions. And this consensus included the focus on Africa. So rather than having our partners say, this should be a G20 process, why are we only worried about Africa? They recognized that future growth, the economic opportunity, that as we've heard today, the bulk of young people, the minerals needed for the transition, all lie in Africa. And so these are not just African challenges, but they are global challenges. And the opportunity is not just an African opportunity, but a global opportunity. So the question, of course, now is what happens next? The current G20 presidency has taken a narrower view of the process, and Africa is unlikely to feature strongly. Fortunately, on the business side, the B20 USA has worked very closely with the B20 partners, including South Africa, and many of the recommendations and the work that we performed last year will be carried forward under their presidency, and several key initiatives from the G20 will also continue regardless. The G20 expert panel on the cost of capital and the 2025 to 2030 G20 Finance Track Africa Engagement Framework will all continue to focus intention on the reforms needed to grow the African continent and the importance of Africa to the world economy. Finally, we have an affirmation of the importance of the bridge between public and private sectors. They have distinct roles, but they are not in opposition. Governments make policy, but businesses can implement and can assist with implementation, often having greater resources, particularly on the continent. They need to do so, though, in a well-governed and transparent manner. We need to always be alive to the risks of market distortion and corruption and profiteering. But done properly, the benefits can be widely shared and can accelerate development for all. Africa navigated the geopolitical turbulence by building bridges, not by entrenching divides, by insisting on the centrality and relevance of African concerns, and by demonstrating that partnerships built on mutual respect and benefit are essential for sustainable and inclusive growth. I thank you.